That's how fast life can turn from grief to humiliation. My name is Naomi Caldwell. I'm 63 years old, a retired literature teacher, and until a week ago, I believed I still had a family that loved me. My husband, Richard Caldwell, had been my companion for 38 years. We built a modest but happy life in a quiet neighborhood outside Chicago. When cancer took him, I thought my hardest battle was over. I had no idea the real storm was waiting for me at home. The funeral was small but heartfelt. Friends, old students, and a few neighbors came to pay their respects. I stood by the grave as the rain fell softly, listening to the priest's voice fade under the sound of the wind. My son, Michael, held an umbrella over my head, but even under it I felt alone. Standing next to him was his wife, Vanessa, elegant, composed, and untouched by emotion. Not a single tear fell from her eyes. After the ceremony, Michael led me to the car. The drive home was silent except for the steady rhythm of rain on the windshield. I glanced at him several times, hoping he would say something, anything to break that wall of distance that had grown between us since he married Vanessa, but his gaze stayed fixed on the road. When we reached the house, I noticed something strange. My 3 suitcases, the same ones I had packed to stay with them during the funeral week, were sitting by the garage, soaked through by the drizzle. I stepped closer, confused, when the front door opened. Vanessa stood there, her arms crossed, wearing that faint smile she used whenever she wanted to remind me who had the upper hand. "I think you misunderstood the situation, Naomi," she said in a calm, almost pleasant tone. "Now that Richard is gone, this house belongs to Michael and me. You should probably start looking for a place that suits your condition." I blinked, unsure I heard correctly. "My condition?" She tilted her head slightly, pretending to sound sympathetic. "You know, at your age, living alone can be dangerous. There are nice care facilities nearby. I can help you find one." My chest tightened, not from anger yet, but from disbelief. I turned toward my son, hoping he would stop her, but Michael only looked down, his hands tightening around his car keys. "Michael," I said quietly, "is this true?" He hesitated. "It's just temporary, Mom. Vanessa thinks it's best for everyone if you move out," she finished for him, stepping forward. "We need the space, Naomi. I'm sure you understand." The words cut sharper than any knife, but something inside me refused to break. Instead, I felt a strange calm wash over me. The kind of calm that comes when you realize tears won't fix anything. I nodded slowly. "I understand," I said. Vanessa smirked, clearly satisfied, and turned her back to me. Michael followed her inside, leaving me standing there beside my dripping suitcases. What they didn't know, what they couldn't even imagine, was that my late husband had prepared for this very moment. While they were busy counting what they thought was theirs, Richard had already made sure that every key, every document, every property deed was under my name. So I picked up my wet suitcases, carried them around the back of the house, and stepped into the small storage room that would now be my quarters. They believed they had won. But the truth was, the game had just begun. The room they gave me used to be a storage space for gardening tools and old furniture. The air smelled of dust and rust, and the only light came from a small window covered in grime. I set my suitcases down on the floor and sat on the narrow cot someone had dragged in for me. The springs creaked under my weight. It was humiliating, yes, but I refused to let humiliation define me. I had lived too many years, taught too many children about endurance, and stood beside my husband through worse storms. I closed my eyes and whispered the words Richard used to tell me whenever life felt unbearable. "When the world turns against you, silence is your armor." That was his way of reminding me that not every battle was fought with shouting. Some victories came quietly, through patience and precision. Outside, I could hear Vanessa's laughter echoing through the house. It wasn't a pleasant sound. It was sharp, like broken glass. She moved through the kitchen giving orders, already acting like she was the new lady of the house. I heard Michael's voice, too soft, apologetic, the way he always sounded when she was near. My heart ached for the boy he used to be, before ambition and convenience replaced kindness. I looked around the small room and noticed an old wooden chest in the corner. Inside were a few blankets and tools, nothing more. My gaze shifted to the nightstand next to the cot. On it lay a small silver locket, the one Richard had given me on our last wedding anniversary. I hadn't opened it since the day he passed. With trembling fingers, I unclasped it. Inside, beneath the tiny picture of the two of us taken in our younger years, was a small golden key taped to the back. I had almost forgotten about it. My breath caught in my throat as I realized what it was: the key to the safe in Richard's study, the place where he kept our most important documents. I pressed the locket against my palm and felt a rush of warmth, as if he were still guiding me. Richard had always been meticulous, the kind of man who planned 3 steps ahead of everyone else. If he left that key for me, it was for a reason. Sitting there in that cold, damp room, I felt the first spark of strength return to me. Let Vanessa believe she had won. Let her decorate my kitchen and command my son. While she laughed upstairs, I sat below her feet, silent and steady, holding the key to everything she thought was hers. For the first time since the funeral, I smiled, not out of joy but out of understanding. They believed they'd stripped me of everything. In truth, I was the only one left with power. The next morning, sunlight filtered weakly through the dusty window of my small room. My back ached from the hard mattress, but I got up early anyway. Old habits never die. When I walked into the kitchen, Vanessa was already there, her robe spotless, her hair perfectly styled, as if she were hosting a TV show instead of a family breakfast. "Oh good, you're up," she said, not even glancing at me. "Can you start the pancakes? Michael likes them fluffy, and the kids don't like when they're burnt." I froze for a second. The audacity of her tone was almost amusing. I wasn't a guest in my own home anymore. I was the help. I tied an apron around my waist and began mixing the batter in silence. The smell of butter and sugar filled the kitchen. For a brief moment it reminded me of happier mornings of laughter, of Richard reading the paper while I cooked, of Michael running in as a boy asking for one more pancake, but those memories vanished the moment Vanessa's phone rang. She answered in that sweet, fake voice she used for people she wanted to impress. "Yes, the house is perfect," she said. "We'll start renovations next month once everything's finalized." I paused mid-stir. Renovations? She was talking about the house, my house, as if she already owned it. The children came down the stairs next, cheerful and innocent. "Grandma, why are you cooking?" Ethan asked, his voice pure curiosity. Before I could answer, Vanessa turned with a bright smile. "Because Grandma helps us now, sweetheart. Isn't that nice?" The room went quiet. Michael looked uncomfortable but said nothing. The children exchanged confused glances. I just nodded and kept flipping pancakes. Breakfast was awkward. Vanessa talked about new curtains, about repainting the living room, about a garden party she wanted to host once the paperwork was done. Each word felt like another knife twisting slowly. After they left the table, I stayed behind, cleaning the dishes. My reflection in the window looked calm, but inside a fire had started to burn. That evening, when the house finally went silent, I walked down the hall toward Richard's old study. The air there still smelled faintly of cedar and ink. My hands shook as I slipped the golden key into the lock hidden behind the bookshelf. The safe clicked open. Whatever Vanessa thought she owned, she was about to learn the truth. The safe door creaked open with a low metallic sigh, the kind of sound that carried both weight and memory. Inside were neatly stacked envelopes, a few old photographs, and a small black leather folder marked with my name in Richard's handwriting, "For Naomi." My throat tightened as I reached for it. Richard had written that label years ago. I could tell by the fading ink and the way his cursive tilted slightly to the right. He always said my name as if it were a promise. Seeing it again made my heart ache in that quiet, hollow way only widows understand. I sat at his desk, the same oak desk where he had written lesson plans and paid bills, and slowly opened the folder. Inside were documents thick, notarized, and official. As my eyes moved over the text, realization hit me like a rising tide. The house, the Malibu Beach property, the investment portfolio, the insurance accounts. All of it was under my name. Not Michael's, not Vanessa's. Mine. My fingers trembled as I turned the pages, each one confirming the same truth. Richard had foreseen this. He must have sensed Vanessa's greed, her way of wrapping Michael around her finger. At the bottom of the folder was a sealed envelope. I opened it carefully, half afraid it would fall apart in my hands. Inside was a letter written in Richard's familiar, careful script. "My dearest Naomi, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I know how you love our family, but love doesn't always protect us from harm. You have a kind heart that's both your gift and your weakness. I've made sure you'll never depend on anyone to keep your dignity. Everything we built together is now in your name. You earned it, you safeguarded it, and you will know what to do when the time comes. Don't be afraid of silence. It can be your greatest weapon." Richard. Tears slid down my cheeks before I even realized I was crying. But it wasn't sadness anymore. It was relief. It was gratitude. It was the power of knowing that even in death he had shielded me. I leaned back, clutching the letter to my chest, breathing in the faint scent of paper and cedar. For the first time since the funeral, my heartbeat slowed to something steady, purposeful. I closed the folder, locked the safe again, and whispered into the stillness, "Thank you, Richard. I know what to do now." Outside, I could hear Vanessa's laughter echo through the hallway again, sharp and hollow. She believed she was building her empire on my weakness. But now I knew better. She had no idea that every wall, every dollar, every inch of ground she stood on belonged to me. And soon she would learn what happens when a quiet woman finally decides to fight back. The next morning, I called Gregory Pierce. He was Richard's old friend and our family attorney for more than 20 years. His voice was calm but sharp, the way people sound when they already sense something is wrong. "No, me," he said. "I was wondering when you'd call. Richard told me to expect your voice one day." I swallowed hard. He planned even that? Gregory chuckled softly. "Your husband never left anything to chance." That single sentence felt like a lifeline. I told him everything: Vanessa's behavior, Michael's silence, and the renovations she mentioned. When I said she had begun talking about paperwork, Gregory's tone hardened. "Naomi, listen to me carefully. Every property and asset is legally under your name. If they attempt to sell or transfer anything, that's fraud. Don't confront them yet. Just document everything." His instructions were clear, so I did exactly that. That afternoon, while Vanessa went shopping and Michael took the kids to school, I went online and ordered 2 small recording devices. They arrived 2 days later, tiny enough to hide behind the vase in the living room and inside the kitchen cabinet. For the next week, I stayed silent and observed. Vanessa's true nature surfaced quickly. She made phone calls to real estate agents, complaining about how slow probate paperwork was holding her back. I recorded every word. On the 3rd night, I caught her voice on tape saying, "We'll list the Malibu house first." The old woman barely remembers it exists. My hand trembled slightly when I replayed that line, but it wasn't fear anymore, it was confirmation. Later, I met Gregory again, this time in his office downtown. The walls smelled of old books and polished wood. I handed him a flash drive with the recordings. He leaned back in his chair and smiled faintly. "Good work, Naomi. But let's not stop them. Not yet." "Why?" I asked. "Because greed always overreaches," he said. "The moment they forge your signature, they hand you the rope you'll use to hang them legally." That night, as I returned home, the city lights blurred through my car window. Vanessa thought she was manipulating everyone, but in truth she was digging her own grave one document at a time. For the first time in weeks, I slept soundly. The plan had begun. A few evenings later, I asked Michael to have dinner with me alone. Vanessa was out meeting a designer about their supposed home renovation plans, and the children were upstairs doing homework. It was the first quiet moment we had shared in months. I set 2 plates on the table, the same table where he used to sit as a boy, swinging his legs and telling me about his day at school. Now he sat across from me, 38 years old, restless, tapping his fork against the plate. "Michael," I began softly, "we need to talk." He looked up, wary. "Is this about Vanessa?" "In part," I said. "I know about the Malibu property, about the calls, about the plans to sell it." The fork froze in his hand. His eyes flickered, guilt flashing across his face. "Mom, it's not what you think. We're just trying to stay afloat. The market's been rough," Vanessa said. "Vanessa said what?" I interrupted quietly. "That you could sell what doesn't belong to you." He swallowed hard, avoiding my gaze. "You don't even go there anymore, we thought." I cut him off. "You thought wrong. That house and everything your father built is in my name. And you both know that." The silence between us was thick, heavy with shame, and the weight of every choice he hadn't made to protect me. "Mom, please," he said after a moment. "Vanessa just wants security, she doesn't mean." I leaned forward, my voice calm but steady. "Security doesn't come from stealing. You were raised better than this." He rubbed his forehead, eyes glistening. "We're drowning in debt, Mom. I didn't know what else to do." "Then ask," I said. "Don't betray." I pulled a small envelope from my purse and placed it on the table. Inside were copies of the recordings and property deeds. His expression changed from confusion to dread. "I have proof," I said quietly, "and I'm giving you one chance to stop this before it destroys you." He stared at me, breathing hard. "What are you going to do?" "That depends on you," I replied. "You have 24 hours to tell Vanessa it's over. No more lies, no more deals. After that, I let the law speak for me." He nodded slowly, his eyes filled with tears he didn't bother to hide. When he left the table that night, he looked smaller than I remembered, not the son I raised, but a man finally realizing the cost of silence. The next afternoon, Vanessa returned home early. Her heels clicked across the hardwood floors like a metronome of arrogance. I was in the living room reading when she walked in, holding a stack of folders and a smile far too confident for someone standing on borrowed ground. "Naomi," she said sweetly, "I've had some legal documents drawn up for your convenience. You just need to sign them so Michael and I can handle the finances. You shouldn't have to worry about such complicated things at your age." I looked up from my book and studied her face. Perfect makeup, calm eyes, but her hands trembled slightly. She was bluffing. "What documents?" I asked, keeping my tone even. "Oh, nothing big," she said with a shrug. "Just a simple transfer of management rights. It'll protect you, of course. You know how confusing all this property stuff can be." I smiled politely. "Why don't you call your lawyer and we'll go over them together?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Fine, he's actually on his way here." Minutes later, a man in a gray suit arrived, carrying a briefcase. He introduced himself as Mr. Dalton, her attorney. He barely looked at me before sliding papers across the coffee table. "These are standard authorization forms," he said. "We just need your signature here and here." I leaned closer, scanning the lines. My name was printed on every page next to the words transfer of ownership. I looked up at him calmly. "You forged these," I said. The room froze. Dalton blinked. Vanessa's lips parted, but no sound came out. "I have recordings," I continued. "Phone calls, conversations, every single word you said about selling my property. Would you like me to play them now?" Her face drained of color. "You recorded me?" "Yes," I said quietly, "and my lawyer already has copies." Michael walked in just then, holding the flash drive I'd given him the night before. "She's telling the truth," he said. "It's over, Vanessa." Vanessa turned to him, disbelief flashing in her eyes. "You betrayed me." "No," he replied softly. "I betrayed my mother long enough." The silence that followed was sharp and final. I stood up, folded the papers neatly and handed them back. "You have 24 hours to leave this house," I said. "After that, I'll let the police escort you out." Vanessa didn't argue. She grabbed her purse, trembling, and stormed out of the room without another word. For the first time in months, the house felt quiet again, not empty, peaceful. The next morning, the sunlight poured through the kitchen windows like a quiet blessing. I brewed coffee and watched the steam curl upward. Thinking of all the mornings I'd spent here, once surrounded by laughter, later by tension, and now by an almost sacred stillness. Michael entered the room, looking exhausted but lighter somehow. "She's gone," he said softly. "Packed her things last night and left before dawn." I nodded. "And the documents?" "Gregory has everything," he replied. "He's already contacted the authorities about Dalton's forged papers. They'll investigate both of them." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The air felt thick with relief and sorrow, relief that it was over, sorrow for what it had cost. "I never thought it would come to this," he murmured. "Vanessa wasn't always like this." "No one starts that way," I said quietly. "Greed doesn't arrive all at once. It grows in the cracks of gratitude." He sat at the table, head in his hands. "I hurt you, Mom. I let her treat you like a stranger in your own home." I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. "And yet here we are," I said. "Alive, learning. That's more than many get." He laughed softly through the guilt. "You always know how to turn pain into wisdom." "That's the only way to survive it," I said with a faint smile. That afternoon, we met Gregory at his office for one final review. He confirmed that all assets were safe and legally protected. The Malibu property, the house in Pasadena, the joint investments, everything had been secured. When we stood to leave, Gregory said something that stayed with me. "Naomi, what you did took courage. Most people your age would have walked away. You didn't just protect your wealth, you reclaimed your dignity." On the drive home, the world outside felt clearer, almost reborn. Michael glanced at me. "Do you think she'll try to come back?" "Maybe," I said. but next time we'll be ready, and stronger. That night, as the waves of memory and exhaustion finally calmed, I opened the drawer of Richard's old desk and found his last note, one I hadn't noticed before. If life tests you, Naomi, don't fear the storm. You were always meant to stand in it and rise above. For the first time in months, I let myself cry not out of grief, but out of gratitude. I had survived the storm and found my strength again. Weeks passed, and the house slowly returned to a rhythm that felt like life again. The scent of cinnamon rolls drifted from the oven in the mornings, and the sound of laughter, real laughter, began to echo through the halls. Michael had taken a leave from work to focus on rebuilding. He started therapy, met regularly with financial advisors, and began volunteering at a youth program on weekends. For the first time in years, I saw glimpses of the boy I'd raised, the kind-hearted, grounded man his father would have been proud of. One Saturday afternoon, while I was pruning the rose bushes Richard had planted, Michael came out to the garden holding 2 mugs of tea. "Gregory called," he said, handing me one. "The investigation's done. Vanessa and Dalton are facing charges for attempted fraud and forgery. There's also a restraining order in place. You're protected now." I let out a slow breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "Justice takes its time," I said quietly, "but it never forgets its way home." He smiled faintly. "You sound like Dad." "Maybe he's rubbing off on me," I replied, glancing toward the sky where sunlight filtered through the branches. The days became gentler after that. I started hosting Sunday dinners again, just Michael, the children, and a few close neighbors. The sound of forks clinking, the warmth of conversation, the smell of roast chicken, it all reminded me that peace doesn't arrive with fireworks. It seeps in quietly when the noise finally fades. One evening, after everyone had gone to bed, I walked into Richard's old study. The chair still creaked the same way when I sat down. On the desk lay a single framed photograph of us standing by the ocean, wind tangled in my hair, his arm around my shoulder. I whispered into the empty room, "We did it, Richard. She's gone." But I didn't break. Outside, a coastal breeze swept through the open window, carrying with it the faint scent of jasmine. I closed my eyes, feeling his presence, not as grief this time but as peace. The next morning I wrote a letter to Gregory thanking him for everything, and included a single line at the bottom. "The storm has passed, now it's time to plant again." When I sealed that envelope, I knew it wasn't just the end of a chapter, it was the start of a new one. For the first time in a long time, Naomi Caldwell felt like herself again, whole, unafraid, free. Months later, life had settled into a calm rhythm that I'd once thought impossible. The air felt lighter, the walls of the house warmer. The garden, once overrun with weeds during Vanessa's reign, now bloomed again, vibrant roses, tulips, and lavender swaying in the California breeze. Michael came by often with the children. They were healing too in their own ways. Little Emily, now 10, had taken to drawing again, bright, colorful sketches of family and sunshine. And Noah, her younger brother, proudly showed me the birdhouse he'd built in school. One afternoon, as we sat under the pergola with lemonade and sunlight filtering through the vines, Emily asked, "Grandma, are you mad at Mommy?" The question caught me off guard, but I smiled gently. "No, sweetheart, I'm not mad. I'm sad for her. Sometimes people get lost in the wrong things: money, control, fear. But I hope one day she finds her way back." Emily nodded slowly, thoughtful in that way only children can be. "Daddy said you're the strongest person he knows." I laughed softly. "Then your daddy needs to get out more." But later that night, when the house was quiet and the moonlight fell across my bed, I thought about her words. Strength doesn't always look like shouting or fighting. Sometimes it's just choosing not to give up, choosing dignity when others try to take it away. In the months that followed, I started writing again, something I hadn't done in decades. I began a small memoir, not about wealth or betrayal, but about endurance, about what it means to lose everything you thought was solid and still stand tall when the storm clears. On the first page, I wrote a single line. "They threw me out of my own home, but I built a stronger one inside myself." That sentence became the heartbeat of every chapter. When I finished the first draft, I read it aloud to Michael. He listened quietly, his eyes shining with pride. "Mom," he said softly, "you should publish this. People need to hear it." Maybe I will, I thought. Not for revenge, but for every woman who's been underestimated, dismissed, or silenced. Because the truth is, survival isn't just about what we keep. It's about what we reclaim. and for me, that was everything. So, to everyone listening, never let anyone make you feel small in your own story. Stand firm, speak softly, and let your strength echo louder than their cruelty. If you've ever been through something like this, share your story in the comments. Because